Without further ado, because you've heard plenty of me, and the reality is I know that we are all very, very excited for this keynote. I am honored to be able to introduce the New York Times best-selling author, the former editor-in-chief of The Chronicle, and the co-host of the Future You podcast, the one and only Jeff Selingo. Let's give it up.
Thank you, Mallory. Thank you, Mallory. It's great to be here. I was telling Mallory earlier when I first walked into this room and I saw all of you like kind of squished together in your seats, it reminded me, how many of you have ever been to the ASU GSV summit or conference? Okay, a couple hands in the room. So the summit now, I think, has like 7,000 or 8,000 people at it, but 15 years ago, it started as something like this. Where it was a smaller group kind of squished together in a room. And so I told Mallory that maybe that's your future. And so I would love to just take a picture of you all. You could wave. It's the end of the day, and I'll post it later on social media. So it's great to be here in Raleigh, because as Mallory knows, I've been on the road since Saturday in Milwaukee and Mackinac Island, Michigan, and I don't know if you've ever been to Mackinac Island, Michigan, but you kind of have to take a plane, a car, and literally a horse and carriage to get there, because there are no cars allowed on the island. So it's much easier to get to Raleigh. So thank you very much for being here. So my goal to end the day today is to talk about the why and the how of AI in higher ed, because I think that the why is often, oh, everyone else is doing it, so we need to jump on the bandwagon. And the how is a lot, I think, around efficiency right now, and not about how I think, and what I want to lay out today is how I believe it could change the student experience in a way that creates new types of learning pathways to compete with what I think is going to be a very changed world in higher education that I'm going to lay out today. I'm going to talk a lot about what I call a new learning economy that is emerging in education, that your institutions and that more traditional institutions are competing against. And this is why I think unlocking the power of AI to create a better institution and a better learning pathway is absolutely critical. In many ways, I see my role as a connector between AI and higher ed. As Ethan Mollick, who I don't know if you follow, but I highly recommend you follow, who's at the Wharton School at Penn, recently laid out, the power of AI is really about connecting experts and people with the latent expertise of AI, right? So when you connect those, you kind of unleash the latent expertise of AI, and I think that's really important. So Mallory introduced me, but I got my background in higher education really through journalism, right? So I don't come from inside of higher ed. I've been a journalist in and around higher ed for the last 25 years, and it really, what journalism did for me is it imparted skills in me to make these connections. And my 3 buckets of work today is I'm a special advisor at Arizona State University to President Michael Crow, where I also lead the Academy for Innovative Higher Education Leadership. I know there may be some graduates of that program in the room today. I also write for a number of different publications and have written 3 books, which you see up there, and I'm working on another book now about college admissions that will come out next year. I also co-host the podcast Future You, as well as write a bi-weekly newsletter called Next. So a lot of what I will be talking about today brings together all 3 of these buckets of work that I've been doing for the last about 10 years since I left the Chronicle of Higher Education. But I actually got my start in journalism as my first real job. I'll talk about a different job I had in journalism later on. But my first real job was just down I-40 here in Wilmington, North Carolina. Anybody from Wilmington? Any Wilmington people? Well, beautiful place in North Carolina, right on the beach, so it was a great job to have in your early 20s. And I had never been there when I went for the job interview. I'm sure many of you remember your first job interview. And this is a story I won't forget, because I flew in on a Friday afternoon. The editor picked me up at the airport. We had a quick lunch along the Cape Fear River, and then we got back in his car and we're driving back to what I thought was the newsroom. And instead, we pulled over to the side of the road, and he handed me a notebook and a pen, and he said, it was about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, he said, get back to the newsroom by 5 o'clock and file a story. And I said, that's it, right? This is like 1995, so there wasn't a thing called Google. There wasn't this phone that you carried around in your pocket, right? There wasn't Uber. And here I was in a town that I never have been to before. So anyway, I got out of the car, I found a story, I filed it, and a couple of minutes before 5 o'clock, I walked into his office, and I said, I'm done. I filed the story, and I thought I would get the job right on the spot. And he turned around, and he said, great. And then he went back to work. And I kind of let out some sort of sound, I think, because he turned right back around and he said, the assignment really wasn't the story. It was your reaction when I let you out on the side of the road. Because he said, I do this with everybody I interview. And he said, some people will ask me a million questions, probably trying to delay the inevitable. Others will ask me to assign them a story. Others will do what you did, got out and get back and finish the story. One time somebody actually didn't come back. He didn't seem that worried about that person. But he said something that I will never forget. He said, success in this job, or really any job, is about navigating the unknown, navigating ambiguity. Most people come out of college having followed a syllabus, having followed a curriculum, and now they're going into a job, in this case in journalism, where every day will be different and you have to navigate that ambiguity. And I wanted to see how you would do it. And in many ways, it turns out that navigating and confronting the unknown every day and tolerating ambiguity in our work is not only a necessary skill for journalists, right? It's a necessary skill for all of us, and particularly now in a world of work that is being reshaped and rethought of as because of AI and automation. In many ways, not since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution and the information age that followed have we seen the scale of this disruption that is taking place in the workforce today, right? The world of work is undergoing a massive shift. The skills needed to keep up in any job, and I'm sure you see this in your own job, are increasingly churning at a faster rate. In fact, this comes from BCG and Burning Glass. A third of jobs, right? A third of all jobs around the world now are being disrupted. And why this is important, because throughout human history, technology disrupting jobs isn't anything new, right? It has happened going all the way back to the Industrial Revolution. But the key has always been that education has been our superpower, right? More education has always kept us a step ahead of rising technology. So in that long race between technology and human work, as long as we had more education, we were going to be fine. More education meant better jobs. And the question is whether that's going to be true in the future. And what that has led to, right, this idea of more education has led to a really kind of transactional and linear way of thinking about education. You went to school, usually K through 12, you went to college, you got a degree, and that equaled a job. And now this linear formula that we have followed really for generations, for a century plus, is shifting. Now it's shifting in a subtle way, but it's important in how it's shifting and why it's shifting. And it's shifting for a couple of reasons. One is we have a tremendous number of people that we need to upskill and reskill across the world, right? The number of people that need to be upskilled and reskilled over the next decade is tremendous. We have a new generation of young learners who want something different out of the college experience. And third, it is also shifting because we need to revive trust in higher education. And so we need to rethink the model in order to revive trust. Now, in many ways, this model has its roots in the Industrial Revolution, right? Because it was a fixed process. You would show up to school, usually in a physical location, at a specific time. You would sit in a seat. You would listen to a lecture, like I'm lecturing now, for a set amount of time. You would get homework, right? This was the basis of the credit hour that we have on colleges and universities. And 120 credits equaled the bachelor's degree. It was very formulaic, much like the assembly line that came out of the Industrial Revolution. But now, just like in industry as a whole, the economy is really undergoing a tremendous transformation. And we're transforming this time from an analog economy to a much more digital economy. And in the digital economy, right, is very different from that industrial economy. The industrial economy is always focused on a common process, right? You just rinse and repeat that common process over and over again. And in education, that meant time was fixed, and so was teaching, right? And the outcome was the thing that was variable. Some students succeeded, some students didn't, right? Some students dropped out of school, some students got to graduation, some students took 4 years to get to graduation, some students took 5 or 6 or 7 years. But we kept the process the same for every student, because that's the only way we could have scaled higher education the way we have over the last couple of centuries. Now, in a digital economy, the outcomes, it's much more focused on the outcomes. And on education, that is learning. What are students learning? Some students learn faster than others. Some students learn differently than others. And can we use the digital economy to transform education in a new way? Because seat time now could be variable, because mastery is what is really key. And this allows for a lot more individualized and better outcomes in many ways, because it allows for a much more flexible experience. So learning, and this is where I think AI enters the picture, because it enables us to scale flexible learning in ways that we haven't been able to before. Much like a century ago, we scaled factory learning and expanded our schools. Now we're going to be able to scale individualized learning in a new and different way. And this means a power shift is going to be coming in higher education, away from the institution at the center, which is the factory, right? And more towards the individual learner, who's going to have a lot more power in this future to decide where they want to go and how they want to have that experience. Now, don't get me wrong, the institution is not going away. I'm not here to tell you hundreds and hundreds or thousands of colleges are going to go out of business. But you face much more competition today from a lot of different learning providers and individual students than you have in the past. And that's going to require you, as a result, to rethink and enhance the student experience and develop a much more compelling value for what your institutions do. Simply put, you will have more competition with students able to develop much more individualized pathways through education. In many ways, this is part of the evolution that we've seen in this country around education, right? As more skills are needed, education has always evolved. So think about the high school movement. In the early 1900s, we decided that basically basic school through 8th grade wasn't enough anymore, and so we went on a huge building across the country of high schools. And so by the time World War II came along, we moved from, in the early 1900s, maybe 10% of Americans having some sort of high school diploma to more than 30% by the time World War II came along. And then, a half century later, the space race in the 1950s and technology being integrated into our daily life really required us to say, 12 or 13 years of education is not enough. And that's when we moved in the 1960s and 1970s with this College for All movement. And the growth in higher education is really not to be underestimated over the last century. Right? In 1900, 1 in 100 adults, young adults, around the world, 1 in 100 young adults around the world were enrolled in higher education. And by 2000, it was 1 in 5. It's amazing what we did over the course of a century with higher education. And now we need to build on these two movements, right? We need to build on both the high school movement and the college movement with what I am calling a new learning economy. Now, what is this? What is this new learning economy, and why do we need it? The narrative that we hear often, usually outside of these rooms, I think, around AI and automation is that it's creating jobs and it's destroying jobs. But the reality is that every job is being impacted right now. As I pointed out earlier, right, we have all of these jobs being impacted in some ways. And BCG and Burginglass called this the great disruption in skills. And they looked at skills over the last 10 years, and what they found was that more than 1/3 of the top 20 skills considered necessary for the average job have changed since 2016. 1/3 of the top 20 skills considered for the average job have changed since 2016. And 1 in 5 skills are absolutely necessary, are absolutely new and necessary in this new job, in this new economy, right? And so how are we going to keep up with these changes, right? It's not going to come from high schools, and it's not going to come necessarily for traditional colleges. In many ways, it's similar to what's happening right now in television, music, and movies, right? The great disruption that is happening in that field, right? If we thought of traditional television, right? I have a 13 and a 15-year-old at home, and I always try to explain to them what television was like when I was growing up in the 1980s, right? You had this thing called essentially appointment TV, and they don't get it. What do you mean? You had to be home at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night to watch TV? Yeah, you did. Well, what happened if you missed it? Well, there was this thing called repeats once in a while, but you probably have to wait till the end of the season. And then you had this thing called syndication. That kind of blew their mind. They had no idea what syndication really meant. Oh, and then this thing called the VCR came along, and if you could figure out how to program it, you could tape the show and hopefully watch it, right? There was this airtime had shelf space. There was shelf space in television. You had a program, 8 o'clock to 11 o'clock, Sunday through Saturday. There were only so many hours in the day. And radio, the same way. Now, the time is unlimited. And this concept of shelf space has been transformed by streaming. We're no longer held captive by a schedule, by time. Just like you can stream television and movies whenever you want. You could binge watch a show. You could watch it over a couple of weeks. You could watch it at your speed. You could go back and repeat it. Why can't we do the same thing with education, right? Why do we need to learn at the same speed? In fact, when I was explaining the concept of linear television to my kids, the first thing they said is, it sounds like school, right? You had to be somewhere at a specific time and a specific place. And as a result, we are now thinking, how can we develop this new learning economy? Why do we need to be held captive to a calendar, right? Why can't it be much more flexible and give students a lot more options? Why does it have to have a start time and an end time? Why can't it be more continual? And the important one down here that I've highlighted is the entire new learning economy being eventually AI-enabled. Because the real advantage, I think, of AI in higher education is what it's going to learn from students and faculty and staff over time, from the experts that are out there now. How are students going to navigate this new learning economy, and what can AI learn from that? How are faculty going to design their courses, and what can they learn from that? Because this is really how we unlock that latent expertise that Ethan Mollick talks about around AI. AI is an expert, but we only unleash it when we connect it to the experts in the room and the user experience, meaning how students navigate our campuses. I just threw this slide in here because I was at Trinity College last year, and it's just such a beautiful place, right? So, but this is what I think of when I think of traditional higher education. And in many ways, that traditional model is broken. The enrollment slide that we've been seeing for the last decade, and now we're about to have a demographic cliff. But I don't believe that enrollment is dropping because there is this demographic cliff coming. I don't think enrollment's dropping because of the FAFSA and because of COVID. We have a value proposition problem in higher ed now. Right? When you look at all the surveys and you talk to students, as I have over the last couple of months for my new book that's going to be coming out next year, one of the things I've discovered is what they really want out of college is a job, And if you ask them what they want out of that job, that they want mobility, right? And they want it, and they want the experience overall to be affordable. And so what excites me most about AI in higher education right now is this ability to unleash these new models for higher education if we allow that to happen. Now, at the same time, what worries me about the rhetoric around AI right now is it's all around efficiency, right? It's all about how can we make our jobs move faster and how can we potentially reduce staff, right? It's all about the efficiency of the model. And that worries me because all that goes up to the president and the trustees, and they see AI as a tool rather than as a transformative vehicle for rethinking their educational experience. In many ways, it reminds me of 1995 for the internet. So this is an article I actually wrote. You can see my byline there. Arizona Republic. I was on a fellowship at the Arizona Republic in the summer of 1995. I walked into the newsroom on that first day of the fellowship, and the business editor looked at me and she said, "You're young, you must know something about technology, and our technology reporter's on leave for the summer, so how about you become our technology reporter?" Now, the summer of 1995, I will say, reminds me a lot of this summer. Where that was it, this is AI summer, that was internet summer. And it was crazy, the articles I would do, right? I wrote an article about internet cafes because that was the only way you could get on the internet usually. I wrote an entire article about how Southwest Airlines was the first airline on the internet, but all you would do is get access to their flights. You would still have to call up to actually make a reservation. And then this is one of the craziest stories I wrote, which was essentially explaining the letters www to people about what this meant, right? But what interests me about, as I was going back through my archives, is that I was talking to professors at that time at Arizona State and the University of Arizona, and they really saw the internet. One professor said, "Oh, it's just a giant encyclopedia," right? That's how they saw the internet. They saw it as a tool rather than the transformative power that it had. And we all know how it transformed higher education and, to be honest with you, every part of our life over the last 30 years. And the same is true for AI, right? We're seeing this. This is a quote from an economist who said, if we just saw the Industrial Revolution as the invention of the steam engine, and we just used that steam engine then and applied it to every industry, we wouldn't have had the changes that we had, right? If every manufacturer decided to keep production and quality the same, but they just decided to use a steam engine instead, where would we be today? And the same thing I think is true is happening right now around AI, right? If all we do is think about how it makes our roles and our jobs and what we're doing now, the process that we use now, more efficient, we're not going to have the transformative effect that we need and really expand the outputs that we need. So I want to talk just a few minutes about some examples because I think you've been here for a couple of days. You kind of know, I think, the transformative power of AI, but I kind of want to just take it up a level to talk more broadly about where I think it could potentially have some of the biggest impacts over the next couple of years. Now, this is definitely not comprehensive. It's not meant to be comprehensive, but there are just 3 areas of the higher education experience where I think it could have a lot of impact in terms of how we think about transformation. The first is enriching the student experience. The student experience are all those day-to-day interactions that students have from the moment that they first connect with your campus through their undergraduate career, through graduation, and then, of course, as alumni. It's everything from enrolling them to getting them into classes to the social experience and the academic experience that they have on campus to that experience they have as alumni. And right now, it's pretty broken, right? There's a student I met a couple of years ago at a big public university, and he was trying to get credit for a summer internship that he had. And he was telling me the story about what he had to do to get credit. He started at the registrar's office sent him to the financial aid office, the financial aid office sent him to the career office sent him to his academic advisor. The academic advisor sent him to the dean, who sent him back to his academic advisor. This took weeks to figure out why he was missing this credit. Oh, by the way, he had to repeat the story over and over again. He had to make those visits in person. This is not a first-generation student, by the way, because I was thinking he probably would have given up because nobody told him. His parents kept on him about getting this credit. And then he finally got that credit. But why did he have to tell that story over and over again? Why did he have to go to an office in a particular point of time and actually talk to a human being to get that done? Just think about all of these experiences on an AI-enabled campus and what it could learn from that, right? We know you've been talking over the last couple of days about enrollment and admissions, right? How we can evolve this one-size-fits-all process. I hosted a webinar a couple of weeks ago that Element 451 supported, where we had a number of people in the enrollment space talk about some of the experiments that they have, right? Southeast Missouri State, maybe here, using AI for application processing. Miami is data mining essays next year to try to figure out, are there anything that students say in the essay, and then looking at student success later on to see if there are moments in the essay during the application process where they might be able to see going forward what that student success might be in college. Emory University is doing work around transcripts and trying to look at how to make those more similar across the 25,000 plus high schools that we have in the US alone. Think about the administrative functions on campus and how these students walk around campus and move and where they go and what they do. Knowing more about those experiences, knowing more about AI learning from their movements around campus and how that equals student success down the road. I'm really interested in what this could potentially do for careers, because the career function at most colleges and universities still is broken. Most students don't go to the Career Center. They might go maybe second semester of senior year. They don't go to think about internships. They don't go to find mentors. They don't go to find how they might be able to job shadow or what experiences that they need. But the more that AI could learn about how students in different majors navigate the undergraduate experience, the jobs that they get afterwards, the internships that they get, just imagine what kind of coach that you could develop on the side to help students in different majors. Many options for helping on this front of enriching the student experience. Second is the academic enterprise and how we could accelerate rethinking this academic experience. You know, the value of the bachelor's degree is first and foremost right now in the minds of college students. But at the same time, a new academic arms race is emerging on your campuses. You know, if you go back 20 years, the arms race in higher education was who could build, better residence halls, better dining halls, who could build those climbing walls and everything else to improve the student experience. I think now the student experience is about improving the academic enterprise, and a lot of it is centered around academic innovation. And the winners in this arms race are going to be those colleges and universities that apply technology in teaching and learning and develop different approaches to credentialing. And why is that? Because increasingly, just like radio consumption's going down and streaming consumption's going up, the same thing is happening with how students learn. Today, a majority of students are taking at least one class online. These are traditional residential students who are living on your campuses, right? At ASU, 57, where I'm a faculty member, 57% of on-campus residential students take at least one online course, and another third take a hybrid course, so a mix between in-person and online. So 9 out of 10 students who are living on campus are taking some form of an online course. I remember when the Future You podcast went to UCLA 2 years ago, right after the pandemic, and we were interviewing the chancellor at the time, Gene Block, and he said students came back from the pandemic and they they looked at the course catalog, not the physical course catalog, but they basically came to us and they said, okay, in this course catalog, I want to take this course online, I want to take this course as a hybrid course, and I want to take this course in person. Because I want to be able to intern, I want to be able to work, I want to be able to participate in my different activities or my different athletics. I want a lot more flexibility. And the first thing he said to us on that podcast is, we can't do that. We can't do that. But that's the student and academic experience that students want. And in fact, this is where, again, AI and this digital economy can really help us rethink what is happening in education. So I went to last year, and this should play. There it is. You probably can't hear the sound, sorry. So this is at the University of Michigan. This is their Center for Academic Innovation, 47,000 square foot facility housed in the original Borders bookstore. So kind of cue the analogies between bookstores and higher education. A little ironic, I guess. It's master control for their AR, VR courses, right? And this is the immersive learning that they're developing at the University of Michigan to engage students in a new and different way. And again, how can AI help us design better courses and better academic experiences so that students could get this immersive learning in a new and different way? Finally, I believe that better use of AI can enable lifelong learning in a way that hasn't been enabled in the past. Because what we learn from accelerating the academic enterprise will also extend to how we measure something that every college and university gives out, and that is the credential. So today, more than 1 million different credentials are being offered in the United States. Let me repeat that again. More than 1 million different kinds of credentials are offered in the United States, and only about half of them are offered by traditional colleges and universities, right? So there is this competition now to offer new and different kinds of credentials. Now, I don't think it's reasonable for most learners to navigate that system by themselves. It's really choice overload, and individual learners won't always know what's best for their career. But the need for lifelong learning will only increase. This is again from that same study from Burning Glass and BCG, which shows among all of those sectors of the economy that are being disrupted by technology right now, it includes some of the most popular majors on most campuses, right? So certain sectors are going to change faster than we can keep up with in updating the curriculum. Most colleges and universities only update their curriculum every couple of years if we're lucky. And the diverse set of skills that most employers are now asking for are not neatly packaged in any major. And so that traditional linear packaged educational experience really can't keep pace with the pace of the economy today. And so your institutions are not only competing against all these other players who are giving out 50% of those 1 million different types of credentials, it's also just kind of competing against itself in order to try to keep up with the changes in the workforce. You know, this is the path we used to follow. It was very linear, it was very siloed, and very segmented, right? You stopped doing one thing to move on to another. And as I think about this new learning economy and how AI could enable it, it allows us to think about learning across a lifetime so that we could dip in and dip out as needed. We could learn in many different ways. And again, all enabled by what AI has learned from those who come before it or our classmates, so that it's essentially a coach on the side to us. Now, you might say, but I work on a college or university campus, change happens very slowly, right? Very slowly. As Michael Crow, the president of ASU, will often talk about when he was at Columbia, he would say a measure would go before the faculty senate. The faculty senate would debate it over the course of several months, sometimes several years. Then they would take a vote, and they would announce the measure has passed, but 2 people voted against it, so we're going to have to bring it back again, right? You kind of need that unanimous viewpoint on campus to move anything forward. So how can we really change our campuses? And in many ways, I think a lot of this is going to happen through radical incrementalism. So it's not going to change overnight, but it's going to change by thinking of our campuses in new and different ways. And it's going to happen in 3 phases. So the top phase there, that black triangle at the top, is the highest risk innovation, right? This is where I think every campus needs to be starting skunkworks or other types of iterative experiments on campus. And it has what I would call a very tight learning cycle. Fail fast, fail often, and continue to iterate on ideas. I think that most college presidents and leaders are really afraid of innovation because they try to put it at the bottom and they try to build it across the entire campus without experimenting in a small way at first. The second place, applied innovation, is where an institution takes stuff from the top of that pyramid and brings it down into pilots things on campus, and then those that are proven are then scaled across departments. So you might try something within a school or a department and then scale it beyond that. And then third is where I talk about long-term transformation, institutional transformation. Because this is really about the culture. You could do the top 2 parts of the pyramid, but it's really the culture that needs to change on many college campuses. And everybody on most college campuses employs in scarcity, right? There's winners and losers. It's a zero-sum game. You gain something, that means somebody else loses. If you're not really confident about the future now, I think that if you're not confident, I should say, about the present, you're not going to be that confident about the future as a result. And so this is really around starting with the supporters on campus, individual departments within the university or individual employers within an industry, and trying to prove the concept at a small place within your institution with employers and then transforming it and moving it across the universities. People are always asking me about the most innovative colleges and universities, whether it's ASU or WGU or Southern New Hampshire or other places. All of them have employed this type of organizational transformation, where it started within a department, where it started within a school, and then spread from there with the early supporters. Still have a third of people usually against it. I think about when I was at Georgia Tech as a visiting scholar a couple of years ago, and we developed an online program in computer science, and most of the faculty were against it, and then the program took off. It got on the front page of the New York Times. It's made a ton of money and has a ton of students at Georgia Tech. Now, if you go to Georgia Tech, you won't find anybody against that, right? Even though most of the faculty were against it when they put it in place a couple of years ago. And this is where I want to end today. Because the demand for learning right now is greater than in any other time in human history, right? This graph shows the percentage of adults who expect to get higher education in all these countries around the world and the percentages of them with an actual degree. There is a gap everywhere. People expect education, but they're not necessarily getting the degree. I want to go back to Hollywood for a second, because a couple of months ago, I'm on the board of Ithaca College, where I was as an undergraduate. I'm on the board of trustees. Bob Iger, the CEO of Disney, is a graduate. And we met out in LA, and I had just heard him speak on a podcast with Kara Swisher. And he was talking about that concept of shelf life, right? Of shelf space, I should say, for programs, and how streaming has just disrupted the whole Hollywood demand, right? And then he said something to me. He said, Jeff, you know, the ironic thing is that demand for entertainment is never been greater, right? Just look at TikTok and YouTube and everywhere else, right? There is more demand for entertainment than ever before, yet the ratings and theater going and everything else is going in the wrong direction. And I said, it's not really that ironic, because the same thing is happening in higher ed, right? The demand for learning is greater than ever before, but our enrollments are falling. And he kind of laughed at that. And I said, well, what's your strategy? And he said, our strategy is to how do we figure out how to get those eyeballs, right? How do we compete against TikTok and YouTube? How can we, as an entertainment giant, kind of change the narrative? Because the demand is there. And the same thing is true in higher ed. How do you take the demand that we know is there and go forward by redesigning a system that engages those students in a new and different way? I think we need to be willing to take the risk. I think we need to be willing to break away from the herd in order to do this. Thank you very much for your time today, and I look forward to some questions.
Absolutely incredible. We are going to move into Q&A, and I already have one from one of our live stream viewers, Jeff. They are curious, how might we persuade skeptical leaders on our campus to experiment more with AI?
So it's a great question because I was just with a group of presidents in Michigan, and I will be honest with you, a lot of them are skeptical, right? They see it as technology back in 1995, or they see it as technology over the last 20 years. It's another tool, and it's just a cost center, right? It's just going to cost them more and more money, right? And so one of the things that we've talked about, and I think that is happening on some other campuses, and I see this happening at Michigan and ASU, but it doesn't necessarily have to happen just at the big players, is this experimentation with different departments and different programs and departments around campus, different disciplines around campus, because that's where I think the opportunities are. People want to be with a winner, right? They want to be with a winner, and if they see a department on campus or a school on campus getting resources to try new things, and those new things are working, other people will want to get on board. It's the same way that we have seen online education develop over the last 30 years. Now, I hope the adoption of AI in higher ed happens a lot faster than the adoption of online education has happened in the last 40 years. I think one of the issues with online education is that a decade plus ago, it was highly correlated with for-profit online universities. Most nonprofits, most quote-unquote name brands in higher education weren't doing online in a big way, and so I think the public got a perception of it. I think that really inhibited the development of online education for quite some time. So I'm hoping that that won't happen this time around, and we'll be able to move much faster.
All right, well, I know you were just with presidents, but can we apply that same question to faculty? Because we did have that earlier today, and I'm so curious to get your take on this.
Well, faculty are it's a tough breed. I compare faculty, I must admit, I compare faculty to journalists. They're just incredibly skeptical of everything. And it's really hard to turn them around. And I think we just need to prove it to them that, again, it can work. And again, if you start small and show them experiments that can work, it will bring them along in a slower, and I've seen this in other ways of innovations on campus. I think what's happening now in too many places is that there's these broad proclamations, usually coming from top, that we're going to do this or we're going to do that. And by the way, remember, there is this scarcity mentality on a lot of campuses. Faculty are afraid. They're afraid for their jobs, they're afraid for their departments, they're afraid for their majors. And changing that is going to be really hard, right? You're pushing up against that with anything that's new. And so I think taking along, especially those early adopters on your campus, I always see campuses as a third, right? A third are going to be against you no matter what. A third are just going to kind of come along for the ride. But there's that third of those early adopters who are willing to try new things. I'm thinking about that video I showed you at the University of Michigan, right? Like, they were able to move into this 47,000 square foot new academic innovation center because 10 years ago, they started doing this work in very small ways in different departments, and they brought the faculty along. Again, I know when you hear 10 years, 12 years, 15 years, you say, I don't have that much time, right? We do have to accelerate this in a much faster way. That, I think, that's going to be more of our challenge, the acceleration, rather than bringing people along, in my opinion.
Hi, Jeff.
Hi.
I'm wondering what you see in the future with accreditors. Some people say that accreditors are flexible, they'll kind of go along with new models, and others say that something more dramatic is going to happen as institutions want to make these type of changes, that the accreditors will have to go away, perhaps the government will get involved in that. What do you think?
Well, I think a couple of things are going to happen. First of all, there's going to be a lot more competition among accreditors, right? Because now more states are allowing and more regions are allowing accreditation shopping in a way that they didn't have. You have accreditors, certain accreditors that are being much more flexible and innovative, right? I was just up in Boston a couple of weeks ago around the 3-year degree, which NECHI and a number of other accreditors, a couple of accreditors have already approved that. You have new accreditors coming along, the Post-Secondary Commission, a new accreditor which is going to look at outcomes. And they're hoping to get accredited to allow colleges to be accredited by them, looking primarily at the outcomes of students. So I think a couple of those things are going to happen. I think you're going to have a lot more competition. I think you're going to have some accreditors, as a result of that competition, become more innovative. And then I think you're going to have these new players. Now, what I think is really going to, we don't really know what's going to happen in the election in November. And that, I think, is going to have a lot, believe it or not, I think accreditation, because both of these presidential candidates have actually used that word, I think we'll have a lot of, depending on who gets elected, we can move in one of two different directions. Because this education department under Biden has been a lot more consumer protection focused. And they believe the accreditors are there for consumer protection. I think that if we have a Republican elected, that it's going to be very different in terms of Washington, in terms of the education department in specifically. Yes?
For pretty much the entire history of higher education, students, when they look at what field they want to go into, they talk to their parents and they're like, hey, there's money in business, there's money in engineering, like this is what you should pursue the trades, et cetera. With the way things are developing with AI right now and how fast things are changing, for the first time in really the history of higher education, that's not possible because nobody knows what jobs are going to be profitable in 4 years, not to mention one. So one of the approaches I've heard to that is that the most valuable things for students to learn is how to learn, how to adapt and learn and be able to teach themselves with AI. So with that in mind, what strategies would you recommend colleges pursue to better serve their students in that venture? And how do you fight that historical narrative in your marketing?
Well, the historical narrative, I think, is tough anyway because we know that students go to college for a job. The number one reason why we've seen this movement away from the humanities and the liberal arts is because more students are pursuing engineering and STEM and business degrees because they think that leads to a job. Now, the first thing to do is to show them the data, because the data doesn't always support that, right? First of all, the averages of salaries, there's a pretty wide band and there's a lot of overlap. STEM majors, for example, especially those students who are not really into STEM, but they're doing it because their parents told them they had to. If you look at the stats, starting around the age of 27, 28, they're starting to flatten out. And why do they flatten out? Because that's when you need to, at least now, need to upgrade your skills. And if you're not really that into it, that's the point usually when you get out of that field and think about something different. So the first thing is the marketing, I don't think has kept up with what the data really show anyway around the liberal arts versus STEM. And I think that we need to be much more aggressive on that right up front. Second is that I believe that if we give students two things, that their degrees will be much more durable. And what are those two things? One is a background, a platform in kind of those durable skills, soft skills that employers want, and that I think even in an AI world are going to be necessary. Things like improved communication, teamwork, problem solving, and things like that, right? So those soft skills, and really not just say we do it, every college says we do it, but credit it in some way. Give them some sort of proof that they have it. Required courses in it, right? So that the outcomes actually match the rhetoric, because I think sometimes that's not happening, right? Colleges say, well, we get students career ready because we do all these things. Not happening on most campuses. And then the third piece of this is to do what the University of Texas system is starting to do around credentials. Embedding credentials in eventually every single degree that they award. so that a history major comes out with a certificate in Tableau, so that they know how to visualize data. An English major comes out with a certificate in Salesforce, so that so whether it's an industry-based certificate like AWS or Salesforce or Workday or whatever it might be, or a certificate that would, again, prove to them that they have negotiation skills or communication skills or marketing, digital marketing skills, whatever they might be. But that is actually embedded in the degree so that they can prove that to the employer. I think all three of those things will help, not necessarily solve, but will help those issues that you bring up.
We have another question.
Excellent presentation, Jeff. Thank you.
Sorry, oh, right, there we are. Thank you.
We've seen a lot more brands like Google and Salesforce offering credentials and certification programs and then hiring based on that.
Yep.
Do you think we're going to see more higher education institutions partnering with these brands and creating bespoke courses for their employees?
Yes.
Quick answer. Love it. Eddie, I'm coming to you.
And mainly because if you don't partner with them, they will just do it themselves.
Hey, Jeff, I've worked at 3 historically Black colleges and universities. So where do you see HBCUs or any other MSI, especially predominantly Black institutions, tribal colleges and universities, where do you see them fitting in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first of all, the student success is going to be critically important at all kinds of colleges and universities, but particularly, MSIs, HBCUs, and others that have historically served a population that college wasn't built for, right? Like that traditional system was not built for most students. My mother didn't go to college, my father did, he was a high school music teacher, but I went to college, I had no idea how to navigate this place, right? Nobody taught me how to navigate that place, but could imagine, again, through AI learning, through students like you, right? What is an African-American male who majors in engineering? What has their experience been like? How did they get through these courses? What types of internships did they have? Could you imagine how much more we could either personalize or show examples of students and give data to prospective students around this area? And also be able to, so I was just out at Bowie State, which is the oldest HBCU in Maryland, and they are developing around careers, right? They're developing a lot of project-based and internship-based experiences for their students. The problem is that they're having trouble getting some students to do that because most students have to work, right? And they don't see the value they think, oh, the short-term value of a job that pays is better than the long-term value of an internship that hopefully pays, because they should pay, but maybe just doesn't pay as much, right? And I'm looking at the short-term value. And again, proof is necessary, and we lack data or we lack insight from that data. So we might be able to say to a student, the internship is going to be much more valuable from this job, but we only have a couple of data points, and we're not really drawing a lot of insight from that data. So I believe that's where, again, AI learning from the experts and learning from the user experiences that come before them could be really powerful in helping develop these pathways. Because again, most students can't navigate the pathways we've already set out for them. So if we start to say it's kind of the Wild West out there and you can kind of do whatever you want to do, that's not really going to be helpful to most students, right? So again, having these AI guides, or think of them coaches or co-pilots, helping these students along this pathway, I think could be incredibly powerful.